So I just want to thank everyone who's joined us today. I know many people will watch this retrospectively because if they're farmers, they're actually out on their farms. But as Michelle was just explaining before, many of you are actually taking the time to learn from these our masterclasses and our Farmer in the Fields. And many of you are also generously doing Instagram takeovers for a week on our Regenerate Now Instagram. And Michelle, you'll be doing that this week. I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Sarah Smuts-Kennedy. I'm an artist. I'm also the vision holder of For the Love of Bees, the umbrella organisation that holds the space for the Urban Farmers Alliance currently, and also Regenerate Now. This is our third Farmer in the Field. We're really excited to still be offering this amazing opportunity to mentor an innovator in their own farm, where they're taking the learning and actually practicing that. And it's terribly essential that we're able to make this visible to the wider community, because these practices, once they're understood and practiced and shown, are able to demonstrate the incredible capacity of regenerative organic agriculture to not only develop food security for communities, but also employment, while they're actually mitigating climate change and restoring ecosystems. I'm really excited to be here today with you in Taranaki at your farm, Goldbush Micro Farms, and we're really looking forward to learning more about your adventure and being able to be useful to you today. So thanks, Michelle. I'll hand it over to you, Daniel.
Hi, Michelle. Really nice to meet you from our communication through the UFA and other things. It's good to put a face to the name. And I think, Sarah, it's actually our 13th Farmer in the Field. Oh. It's certainly, yeah, more than 3. So yeah, so it'll be really looking forward to having a look around your project today, your farm. And my background is I'm a biological or agricultural agronomist, and so I work with growers and farmers from one end of the country to the other, helping them with crops and growing systems, and I'm also a trustee for the Love of Bees, as well as the many other things that I get talked into doing, like this. So you take it away, Levi. Introduce yourself. And
kia ora all, and nice to see you, Michelle. What a beautiful view you've got there. Super stoked to. I just feel like I'm there. A hell of a lot different to the kind of farming that I do, which is smack bang in the middle of the Auckland CBD. Really keen to see your farm and see what you're getting up to. The thing for me, obviously, is that I run a hyper-intensive, small-scale urban farm called OMG, right in the middle of Auckland. We've only got 500 square meters, and we're just trying to really push the boundaries of what's possible with the space that we've got. So we do some pretty crazy things. We jam the plants in super close together and really try to push the boundaries of what's possible to produce in a certain area. Yeah, so super excited to see what you've been up to.
Thanks for the welcome. I'm super excited to be here today and to learn from all of you, and to learn how to do the jamming everything in and grow as much as possible in a small space. So yeah, I'm going to show you guys what we've got here. We've actually got 3.8 acres, but I've 1/8 of an acre market garden production, and then we've other bits and pieces. So I've actually posted on the Regenerate Now Instagram takeover today a full tour of our property. So we won't do all of that today, because otherwise it would take a bit to walk around, but you can have a look at that there. And then today we'll just concentrate more on the market gardening side of it.
Great call, Michelle.
So cool. So I just thought I'd start here with, I'm actually in our house garden. I've got a raised bed here, but something that I've always kind of done for the house garden before we had a market garden is jam pack a lot of things into a small space, because it was efficient and it meant less weeding, and there was lots of benefits to me for it. Now I'm learning more about the biology first, how that's beneficial in general. But I've got a few questions about how you decide what goes where, and like distances, and how basically how you kind of decide how much that you can fit in, or how close they need to be to each other, of the different types of species. So I'm just going to flip my camera around if I can. Okay. Oh, there we go. So this is just a raised bed that we have here, and I've got lettuce, sorrel, broccoli, kale, cauliflower, chard. There's violas and calendulas and things in there as well. And we've been picking from the lettuce and the sorrel. So yeah, I was just, now that I had planted this before, I learned about the brassicas not having the mycorrhizal fungi. So now I'm looking at this thinking that I've probably got too many brassicas all stacked up next to each other. Would that be correct?
I wouldn't say so.
No? Okay, cool. Because
Is there anything underneath them?
Yeah, so they've got the calendulas, for example, here. The calendulas are coming up between them, cauliflower and kale there, and violas and things.
Oh, lovely.
Yeah. So I guess that was part of the. I haven't done a lot of this in the market garden yet. I've just started some, which I can show you next. But I guess I was just wondering, because you do a single row of each thing, it looks amazing. But yeah, if you had a lettuce, a row of lettuces, a row of dill, 2 rows of beetroots, and then a row of lettuces or whatever, like, are you finding that you're needing to have that diversity across the bed completely, or is it okay to have more of the same thing next to each other?
The reason that we do the diversity is, there's a lot of reasons. The main reason that I chuck something in amongst the brassicas is that you get an extra harvest from it. So at that current stage now, where it's just your brassicas, your big broccolis standing there, there's obviously no light underneath them there. So if you were to whack,
between them,
if you were to whack in anything now, it's a complete and utter waste of time. The trick to companion planting is basically, I'm not sure how big those brassicas were when you planted them. Were they, how big were they?
Like
were they 10 centimeters?
Yeah, they were.
Yeah.
About.
Yeah. So the trick is to be planting your brassicas when they're that big, and at the same time you pick a crop. It could be, I know, a whole lot of onion crops grow extremely well next to brassicas, the allium family. Also had wonderful success with coriander underneath brassicas as well. Lettuce, basically, and what the thing is that you plant those seedlings, the coriander and the lettuce, and they're the same size as the brassica at the moment that you plant them. And then as they grow, they're filling that space. They're filling that space as the brassica is filling out. At the end of the day, you'll be left at the end of that bed and that cycle of that bed. You'll be left with you'll be left with mainly brassicas, right?
Okay,
but the point is that going up to that point, you'll have stuff that you can harvest from up to that point. So lettuce and coriander would be, or lettuce, coriander, and spring onions are ones that I've done with brassicas that do really well. All of those, you'll notice, are a leaf. Okay? So I wouldn't be whacking in a bulbing garlic or a bulbing onion amongst those brassicas. Number one, they take longer, and number two, they require more sunlight from photosynthesis to form that bulb that's down the bottom. So it's really important with companion planting. Generally, if you were to whack in some turnips, or if some beetroot, even though I have done beetroot, but you're generally really more safe with companion planting when you've got something grunty like a beetroot or a cabbage or whatever. It's going to get shrouded out. You're better off going for a leaf that can grow and produce a final crop in more low light conditions. But yeah, as I say, there's lots of different things you can companion plant with. But when we're talking about broccolis in particular, yeah, I'd recommend spring onions, coriander, and lettuce.
Okay.
Yeah, those would be my picks. But the purpose is, like, yeah, we do them in the rows, and every row that I've done with brassicas, it started off, you know, I'd probably, in that row there'd be about 8 rows of things, and then 2 of them would be brassicas. And by the end, the final harvest of that bed, the brassica, your broccoli or your cauliflower is like the climax of that succession. It's the end of everything. And so the point of doing the dense plantings and the companion plantings is not, it is obviously for diversity of species and diversity of sugar going into the soil, but the main thing is that you get a complexity, you get a greater harvest. That's the number one thing. Yeah.
Cool. So I'll show you something that I did at the beginning of lockdown after watching one of your first things. And obviously hang on, let me see if I can swap
Michelle,
this.
before we head on to that, I'm just going to do a double check. Was a really fantastic answer, particularly from a market gardening cropping perspective. Daniel, do you want to add anything to that question in regards to the diversity, in regards to just the soil function, while we're here?
Only thing I guess you could add to that is just for people that maybe haven't heard of why that diversity is beneficial to the soil system. So, but other than that, Levi did a really good job of sort of explaining options of how you go about it. I know where Levi's planted up beds like that they've gone on to harvest from them for really long periods of time before they've actually, you know, replanted the whole bed, because it's just like a succession of crops coming once you plant that bed up, rather than putting a bed in and then every 60 to 90 days or whatever turning the bed over. Those beds can go for months of often with harvesting coming out of it. But yeah, just in basic principles, that every plant basically works together with there's a group of organisms that kind of seem to thrive in association with different plant families and species, and I won't go into the basics of it, but the more diversity that you have in the soil or in a bed, the greater the diversity of the microbial life that's going to be able to function in that bed, and that basically lifts the whole productivity of the system in loose terms without going into specifics.
So it's really around one of the things that makes that enables us to really exponentially repair soil systems is the soluble carbon, which is the sap that's been produced through photosynthesis. So by having no rupture, and this is on as it's a succession, we're basically maximizing that continual flow or pulsation of sap down into the soil, which is then being returned to the plant through having gone through the poop loop. Which and those, for those of you who are coming to this conversation, these are issues that we go into in depth in the masterclass series in number 2 and in particular. But please go and have a look at those on our YouTube if this is something you want to learn more about. Great question, Michelle. Let's go to your next question.
Cool. Well, this is still possibly the same question, but more of a, I guess, as a show and tell of what I did. So what I didn't have at the beginning of lockdown was many transplants ready to go to try this. So we had already planted out some of our brassicas that we had. And so what I've done is I've planted some lettuces along this row on either side of these brassicas. And then I direct seeded some coriander and parsley and dill in different places. So following Levi's directions, they may or may not come to much because they will get shaded out, but everything's growing quite slowly now anyway. And obviously we're going to harvest, these are cut and come again lettuces. So yeah, we'll cut them and then leave them to regrow, which takes a couple of weeks this time of year, and then 1 week in summer.
So one of the things I noticed that you talked about in your first Regenerate Now Instagram takeover was the width of beds. So you have been following a particular course in terms of your establishing your garden beds. And do you want to have a talk about, since we're looking at these garden beds, just talk about your thoughts at the moment in terms of where you think you might head with that?
So I guess currently, well, it all came down to our infrastructure that we had, and it worked out very well for us to do it this way. Having listened to what Daniel said about being able to walk on your garden beds and how we can do so many more rows and planting like Levi does with the alyssum right on the edge. You'd have another row here, wouldn't you, Levi? Like right in.
And also in that, were you short of? Oh, you were short of the broccolis, eh? Because I would have done a whole where you've got the coriander there. You would have just chucked in another brassica in the gaps there.
Just dug it up and into space between them, so they're not directly opposite, but growing in between the spaces. Yeah.
So you understand that, Michelle, in terms of, so you're looking at
diagonally.
Yeah,
so
that's normally what I do.
That here because I was trying to do your single rows, and I've got some other things which are more doubles over there. But yeah, okay, that's cool. Now that I know more about what you mean about thinking about the species being that hierarchy of the brassicas being the.
And you can still have two rows that are the same going through the middle. That's fine.
In terms of density, I mean, particularly when things are growing a little bit slower, I mean, the idea is to basically, I guess the ultimate is to have the soil covered by leaves, and the greater that your, the less soil that you can see, the better, essentially, in any sense. So the fear in a lot of cases of planting things further apart was always about mitigating, thinking in terms of disease, but not understanding the link between soil health and plant health. We were always thinking in terms of, well, if you're planting too close, the crop will suffer various different diseases or whatever it happened to be, and that's where you start looking at it from a very different perspective. So yeah, what I found is that often you can plant things an awful lot closer than what you think they can, and quite often overplanting is actually gives you greater benefits at the end of the day than underplanting overall. So I would tend to go with everything you're doing probably closer as a general rule, and just intensifying that productive capacity, because it's basically what the soil wants. It doesn't want sunlight hitting it.
Yeah, for sure. Okay. Yeah, I guess that's just part of my learning, is especially this time of the year when it's everything's so slow and we're so wet. Part of my learning is the sun. Getting to a point where I know how much what will grow quicker and all that sort of thing. So yeah.
It really it just takes time and practice. That whole companion planting thing, it takes time and observation, and as a general rule, plant way more than you think is possible.
Yeah.
Because worst comes to worst, you come through and you harvest it out.
Yeah.
You just harvest it out.
At the end of the day, it's a case of maybe thinning rather than weeding.
Yeah. And then what you do? Yeah. That's the thinning is the harvesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that comes down to, as I say, like you've got your different types of vegetables. You've got your like, I don't know how you harvest your coriander or your dill or your carrots, but I just like to pull them out with the roots and everything. It's a really clean, easy harvest. It's not a cut, and then as you pull it out, it's gone. Spring onions and lettuce is another one you should be doing. That's really easy. They're just a great combos that I know for people companion planting to start off with. spring onions and lettuce really, really well. And just do your lettuce at your normal spacings, and right in between them, plop a quite a mature spring onion seedling, and
Yeah.
they'll
I noticed you
the
used
key
it.
is,
Yeah.
Hmm?
Sorry, I noticed you did plant a lot of spring onions at OMG.
yeah, you can.
I'm sure I'd be able to sell. I don't know if I'd be able to sell that many, but
Oh yeah,
is that a common thing that you have in most weeks? Is it?
all the time. Love
Yeah.
them. But how are you selling things, Michelle?
So we do veggie bags, but yeah, much smaller than yours. Ours are $25, and they have 7 or 8 things in them.
Mm,
And yeah, so before lockdown, we were doing 6 or 8 bags. I work 4 days off farm, and my husband works 40 or 50-hour week, and we have a 2-year-old and a 5-year-old. So this is very
mm,
part time. So yeah, we were just kind of chugging along going into winter, and then lockdown happened. And I've been sending out a
yeah,
weekly news, just sharing what we're doing and what's in the veggie bag for the week for a
mm,
long time now. And as soon as
mm,
lockdown happened, I was turning people away. We were doing 18 to 20 bags a week, and I couldn't keep up with the demand. We just didn't have enough in the garden and the ground.
yeah.
Um, so it's
Spring
been
onions.
really to see what we could actually do if we were pushed, if we had to. So I was
Yeah,
still a essential worker, still working part time off the farm, but yeah, so it was quite challenging. But
cool. If you got a veggie box, man, people love spring onions. Give them heaps.
yeah.
They,
Now that
mm,
I've planted some seeds and things, so they'll be going out shortly. But yeah, it's just
cool. Yeah,
I,
the trick with them is make sure they're really tall
yeah,
before, because they just have to get above stuff. Same thing with
okay,
leeks. Yeah, as long as they get above it, because the allium family just, they're not bushy. They kind
yeah,
of have they just got a few central leaves that just go up, and the trick is just to get them above the canopy of
mhm.
whatever you've got underneath, lettuces, broccoli, whatever it is, and then they'll do well.
So
I did a
Levi,
really good. Oh, sorry.
I remember Alan talking you through a pluck, a pick, a
Yeah,
chop,
yeah,
and a pull. So do you want to just particularly that becomes a really useful strategy in summer when you have a lot more fruits? But do you just want to
yeah.
talk a little bit about that in regards to this density and also structure of density in your farm?
Yeah, well, the pulls are great. Generally, the pole vegetables in a companion planting context would be, well, I guess in my case, it's coriander, it's radishes, it's carrots, it's spring onions. Those get pulled out,
Beetroot.
and they get pulled out to make space, and that pull is also a process of harvesting. So that's the one thing. Your cut vegetables should be easily accessible. That's very important. You don't, like, here's the other thing as well. Like, when you're cutting things and you do a whole bed of lettuces, and you have to straddle that bed of lettuce to chop your lettuce that is in the middle of that row. You have to put your foot over it, and it's quite difficult. Yeah, we don't do that. I do all my cut vegetables right on the edge. And quite often cut vegetables are leafy vegetables as well, like a lettuce. So if it's something that's big and bushy that you're coming again. What is other lettuces? Some people grow coriander and parsley like that as well, but you can put them on the edges and just let them grow into the path. So the cuts on the edges really easily accessible. And most of the time, you're plucking vegetables, which is like your tomatoes, eggplants, cucumbers, beans. They're the gruntier ones. You can grow them vertically up, right in the middle of that row. What we've got at the farm, I'm not sure if you have much vertical structures for summer, Michelle. Are you growing vertically much?
We've got the caterpillar tunnel. So because we're on a very, very windy site, I can't grow cucumbers and
No,
tomatoes outside. They need to be.
outside.
We can open the leeward side of the hill, to make sure that they're protected from the wind. So we do grow eggplants, cucumbers, peppers, and tomatoes in summer in the tunnel. We string them up.
Okay, string them up. Cool. We normally do. I wonder how beans would go, because outdoor beans can withstand a hell of a breeze.
They can. We have a very hell of a breeze. They get all like marks on them where they've rubbed. So we have dried beans in a few different varieties. So I'm going to actually try some beans in the tunnel as well, and then maybe just trying different spots in the garden to see about wind. And we're still planting things. And we've got we've got shelter belts planted and things. Where are we? Here we go. Some shelter trees planted. So we're just kind of waiting for things to grow up more.
So that's another thing that you can be thinking in terms of your density of planting, is actually putting things in certain arrangements that give you the kind of tiny little microclimates that are useful. Again, Levi, do you want to just potentially just describe your layering that enables you to create microclimates for summer and potentially also for a colder climate?
Yeah, the something that I'd love to, I should draw it up, the crop plan for the tomatoes and the beans and stuff, because you can get a beautiful sort of height happening, like a triangle height on the bed, where you've got your lower cut things on the edges with your taller vertical things growing up. At the moment, we've got I often find it's amazing because the stuff you can grow up vertically, often they're legumes as well, peas and beans. Peas would be a great vertical thing for the winter. I mean, in your greenhouse, I'd be cranking them right up. And what grows well with peas is brassicas. That's something that's another one I didn't mention before. Peas and brassicas, awesome combination. Anything that's vertical that can climb up above it, why not utilize that space? And then when you do that, the peas are fixing nitrogen for the brassicas underneath, and then on the edge of that you have a little cut vegetable. So you've got you can whack in some spring onions there as well. When you come to tomatoes and cucumbers and all that stuff, the companions that I know for tomatoes, oh man, there's so many. I know a lot of very well-known market gardens that do beetroot, celery, and carrot. You could do tomatoes and one of those things, or you could do tomatoes and all three of those things. You could have tomatoes growing up, and then on one side of that you could have celery, and then on the other side of that you could have beets, and you could even do beets and carrots. Really stagger it up. What way are your beds facing? Are they north, south, or east, west?
They are southeast, northwest.
Okay.
Just the best way that fit into the space that we had. We didn't really decide. Well, I guess I could have shorted that way, but yeah.
Does it mean
when you start growing those crops in between that are taller, so for argument's sake, if they're this little light, the direction of the beds basically want to be as much north-south as possible, so that you get an even distribution of light, because as you start getting crops taller in the middle, it becomes more it's more critical at different times of the year. I was thinking about all those various different things. I mean, one of the things you could grow out in the middle of the bed, which is quite good at working, and I've seen it used almost as a windbreak, and it can be strong enough, is actually corn. And particularly if you've got it in a number of beds, and they provide, you're thinking that they're going to be too shady, but usually when corn is at its best, producing through the hottest times of the season, that's when the leafy greens actually want the shade. And there's a lot of those things that perform much better in a bit of shade. And that if you plant enough of those sorts of things, you can actually break the wind up. They can actually work as a windbreak effectively as well. And even like you're outside your property where you've got those trees waiting to grow up, actually, if you grow that sort of crop in between all of that, you can get quite a lot of height without interfering with your trees, and actually produce crops within the middle of those trees and things like corn through the summer. And they'll only add, it basically just reduce the weed loading around your hedging that's going on around that planting around the outside. You can plant underneath that, around the edge of your property. You can plant things like pumpkins as well underneath that corn, and that all sort of works extremely well to utilize some of the areas that are less traditional, but also creating reduce weeds and maintenance, and also reduce wind loading on the rest of the property as well.
I could definitely imagine growing, pumpkins and then trailing up the trees now that they're a bit bigger. The one thing that, I'm getting a bit of feedback. Where's that coming from? Sorry. The one thing that we have done that is not following your advice. The one thing we've done that's not following your advice is we've actually removed all of the couch from this area. So I've got weed mat around the outside. My goal this winter is to remove the weed mat and plant clover, because we've proven that if you mow clover, it will outcompete the couch. But we did spend a lot of time digging up this place and completely messing with the soil. But I figured the soil was already messed with because it was so compacted and badly managed from a farming perspective.
Hey, Michelle, how I was just real interested in what you just said about clover outcompeting the couch grass and how you've proven that. Can you explain more about that?
Sure. So when we first got here, we weren't planning on having a market garden, and we just had the little house garden at the front. And I was just experimenting with all sorts of things. We did some lasagna gardens and a hugelkultur and those raised beds and some other bits of, just threw some stuff in there, was growing, and the couch was taking over. But the part that we hadn't planted, we were mowing as paths and a bit around the clothesline and that. And we just noticed over time that it was just really, really clover dense, and the clover just kept growing and growing, and we were mowing it every week, every fortnight, and there was no couch in there. That was really interesting. And then couch overgrew everything in there, and that's why I've given up on that area. And you'll see that in the thing, the Regenerate Now Instagram video I did today. There's a bit more detail about that, but
that's right.
We removed it completely from here. We knew that it was part-time, and that I didn't have time to waste on weeding. And I think now that I know what I do, I mean, I don't know even if I could still do it, but Daniel's, you put the cardboard down, you put your compost in, you grow things. The bit I've always been missing is having enough cover, having plants covering the ground all the time. So although I've tried lots of different things to try and manage manage with having the couch, I haven't succeeded, but I also haven't tried it Daniel's proper way yet.
Michelle, when you do your clover, it's so funny, man. I grow clover in 144 cell plugs.
Oh yeah.
I grow it in, it's the way to do it. You can sow 10 of them, and then you can, because the thing is with the clover seed is it's so small, and it does take a long time to establish. And if you want to get a head start on that, grow your clover in really small. We got the small 144 cells. I'm not sure if you've got that, but we grow them out, and they grow exceptionally well, and they transplant exceptionally well, and it's amazing. And what you can do is using that methodology, the moment that couch is, I mean, you could almost just experiment with mowing, mowing it, and then just bashing the clover transplants in when they're quite solid, and then you can just have an instant clover patch. Give it a go. It's way easier than sprinkling seed everywhere, and you're not
doing them as seedlings. I'll definitely do that. That's why we haven't done it yet, but I'm thinking about how to do it. So yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, cool.
All right. Do we want to go? Is there anything else you want to show us, or questions you want to ask us, or do you want to go on to your soil test?
I guess I will move away from this area for us to talk about the soil test. So you don't want me to dig a hole or look at any soil or anything. You're happy with just talking about it from the soil test?
Yeah, we've probably got, if we're trying to keep this under an hour, we probably haven't got time to see digging holes as well as talking about what we're sort of finding at the moment. But one of the questions I would ask, I guess, is what sort of worm numbers are you finding when you do actually dig holes?
It's very dependent. Yeah, sometimes it's only 5, sometimes it's a bit more, but yeah, not nearly as many as we'd like to see.
Okay.
And we have gone through a very dry patch, and now it's been very wet, so I'm hoping we'll get to a bit of I don't know, happier worms, I guess.
Yeah.
Are you making your own compost, Michelle, or are you buying compost in?
I bought compost in. Oh, I'm onto the wrong page. Sorry, I was trying to print the report. I've bought compost in. I have tried to make some of my own, and yeah, that's one of the things with the cooch is I've made several compost heaps, and the cooch gets into it or grows up through it, or any number of variations of that, and I'm like, I can't use it on my market garden. I was like, well, we use it somewhere else, but to put anything that potential.
What I might do is, if everybody wants, I can share the screen so everybody can actually be looking at the figures in the graph that we're actually talking about. So I'll give that a crack and we'll see what someone can tell me, whether they're Catherine or somebody else can tell me about. What are they? Are you just seeing the graph at the moment?
We are seeing
The spreadsheet.
Yes, the spreadsheet.
Yeah, okay, but you're not seeing any background. You're just seeing just purely the spreadsheet.
Just purely the spreadsheet.
Yeah.
Okay, right. That was the main aim of this. So, yeah, I mean, I did manage to squeeze in processing your soil analysis that arrived yesterday. And what I basically do is take that information that you have a copy of from the lab as well, and put it through a program to sort of analyze that data. The report I've sent you has recommendations on how to correct some of the issues, but what I'm looking for is particularly key issues that correspond. And one of the first things that looking on.
Can I ask you something first, Daniel?
Yep.
Can you just, for those people who've not come across the soil test before, can you just, so that they understand sort of what they're looking at, you've got a green line and a blue line. What is that indicating?
Okay, so essentially this is graph. I'll come it down a little bit. You can see at the top there, you'll see that it's showing, it's sort of a visual indication of what the numbers mean, is that we graph it. So if it's in the low area, it's definitely seen as deficient. If it's in this medium area, it's sort of within what we're looking at as a target range. And when it starts getting into this high area and then the colors start changing, when we really consider them moving towards an excessive level. And we look at the associated problems. So those, usually when they're really deficient, I don't know if you've got one here, no you haven't, it'll sometimes show up when they're red. When you see them and they're red, they're actually showing you extreme deficiencies. So
now, but for people who haven't come across the soil test, we go into the soil tests in some detail in our masterclass. Is that masterclass 2, Daniel? Do you recall?
I actually thought it was probably in 1, right. But I could be wrong. It's 1 or 2, but certainly from that perspective. We do cover this a little bit. What I basically want to do here for Michelle today is, I guess, just quickly point out the highlights of where we start to see problems and how we correct them. So the first thing we're looking at here is the pH level of the soil. I'll just scroll it down a little bit. So initially, the first line of figures is basically what your test score has come back with, and then this next column is showing what we consider to be the ideal level. So our target range wants to be, or what the ideal figure is. So your pH is 5.6, which is reasonably acidic. There are a range of problems associated with that. The target level that we're looking for is 6.3. The reason that is the target is because that's the point where the ideal nutrient availability becomes, because you've got some things become more available when it's acidic, some things are more available when it's alkaline. What you're looking for is the total maximum availability of the nutrition, and that all sort of correlates at around this 6.3 figure. So at 5.6, you're not getting the greatest availability of phosphorus, but you are starting to get availability of things like aluminium, which you actually don't want, and that can create some toxicity issues. The next figure we're looking at here is organic matter, and at 13%, it is on the, as the graph is showing, it is on the high end of the scale. Really, we're wanting to see a figure closer to 10%. At 13%, we're starting to see some negatives associated with an excess of organic matter in the soil. And one of the things that we start to see is that the next one down is conductivity, which is measuring basically the soluble pool or nutrient pool in the soil, which essentially is what plant available nutrition. And your conductivity is a bit low, and that is not uncommon when you start getting excessive carbon, because that basically starts to soak up, essentially has to absorb a certain amount of that nutrient pool that's available. So you end up with, what we're seeing here is basically a low conductivity in the soil, which is indicating, which is sort of correlates a little bit quite often with when we start seeing excess organic matter start to rise. Interesting enough, your pH level is, and we'll look at why that is low. It has to do with a lack of calcium, magnesium, and an excess of sulfur. So we've got magnesium, calcium are alkalizing, so they will lift the pH. In fact, magnesium lifts it 10 times per kilo, 10 times more than calcium. Everybody thinks only in terms of thinking about lime for lifting pH. It's actually magnesium lifts it far more. But sulfur, which is the other big blue line down here, is for one reason or another, we're finding an extreme excess of it. And that is very acidic. I can already know at the moment you're wondering where on earth is the sulfur coming from. You know, because this is typically what starts happening. You start looking at your soil thinking, well, why on earth would we have all that extra sulfur? And again, it's a matter about discussing potentially what you have been putting in, where that could have come from. More than likely, you've been buying in your compost?
Yes.
Okay, so one of the things that we'd look at was we're starting to look at, particularly when we really started to get serious about this, we asked the compost suppliers to give us nutrient analysis. All commercial compost is continuously analysed, usually on a batch basis, and we'd start looking at if we're starting to get things like this excess sulfur. But sulfur is held in the soil by soil carbon. So when you've got lots of excess soil carbon, you can actually hold a lot more sulfur than you ideally want, and this creates an acidic situation. The other problem that you get, we don't test chloride anymore, which is the next one, simply because every chloride test that we get in New Zealand comes as massively excessive. So what's the point in testing it? We know when we're near coastal situations, which pretty much is everywhere in New Zealand, we always have more chloride than we need, because those between sodium and chloride are the two biggest factors in seawater, which we find a lot in our rainwater supplies. But yeah, you start to understand when you're looking at, well, why is the pH low? It's not only because somebody in a conventional fertilizer situation would tell you to put an enormous amount of lime in without thinking about the mobility of sulfur, or even the necessity for magnesium. The other thing your soil has, and I'm assuming this used to be was it dairy or dry stock? But I'm assuming it was grazing land.
Dairy, yeah, dairy.
Yeah. So what we're seeing here is this massive excess. This is the other blue line, which is the phosphorus. So the total there's two different phosphorus tests listed here. This TAE means total acid extraction, which means the total amount of phosphorus that's available in your soils is actually huge, because New Zealand farmers were told for a generation or 2 generations that New Zealand soils were low in phosphorus, so they dumped superphosphate on your soils, which is quite likely where all your sulfurs actually originated from, because that's broken down by sulfuric acid. So when you've got, at some point, you've got ridiculous amounts of superphosphate having been applied to your soils, and we've got, you know, the pro of this is that the Malic-3 phosphorus, so this is the protocol, that's another phosphorus test. This is trying to test the amount of phosphorus that's plant available. Malic-3 is quite a strong extraction process. So we're looking for between 30 and 70 ppm. You're sitting at 57. It's kind of theoretically a pretty nice sweet spot to be in. So even though we've got this ridiculous amount of phosphorus, what we've got is quite nice mobility, which is telling me that we are starting to get reasonable amounts of biology actually functioning in that soil, because the only thing that'll break this phosphorus that's in the soil, which is locked in with the calcium, apart and actually make plant soluble, is actually biology. And the greatest organism that does that job is mycorrhizae fungi. And over 70, so we set the upper limit at 70 ppm, because if you have a soluble phosphorus over 70 ppm, mycorrhizae fungi go dormant, or the plant stops feeding them, basically, because they've got all the phosphorus they want. So they create exudates for the other nutrients, and the mycorrhizae fungi have been shown to go dormant above 70 ppm. So although we've got lots of phosphorus available, which basically means we just never have to put theoretically any form of phosphorus in your soil ever, is the answer, right? For the 2 or 3 generations that are going to live on this farm will never have to put phosphorus in there potentially ever again. They probably didn't need anywhere near the amount they had to start with, because, yeah, in terms of biological availability these days, we don't consider many soils to be deficient in phosphorus at all. It's very rare that we'd actually suggest putting phosphorus in. But conventional agriculture today, if you went to soil analysis from a conventional fertilizer company, they will sell you phosphorus, right? Because your phosphorus actually is below the 70 ppm. In fact, the lab figure is happy to see 150 ppm of that phosphorus, and they'll keep selling you phosphorus, and you'll keep building your phosphorus pool, but spending money on phosphorus that you never actually needed.
Can I ask a quick question on that?
Sure.
Yeah, before you do, I'm just going to let you both know we've got 10 minutes left. So I just want you to really use the next 10 minutes really well. Go ahead, Michelle.
Okay, so it's just around that phosphorus. And at what point would you get to where you might be ending up with too much phosphorus being drawn from that overgrown TAE?
It actually has more to do with the fact that as we work through the process of getting your biology to function, the biology is really good at extracting the phosphorus as it's required, and the plant will feed those organisms to get more phosphorus. We screw that up when we use the conventional model. We just basically, we haven't enough soluble phosphorus, because they would never measure the TAE phosphorus. They'd only ever measure, actually what they do is they'd measure Olsen phosphorus, and I guarantee your score will come back because you're actually quite deficient in phosphorus. So you need a whole lot more of it. And that's where that problem arises. When you actually have this sort of information, that kind of potential to get excess doesn't really exist, because you're allowing the biology to actually monitor that and manage that for you, and all you're doing is feeding it and looking after it. So yeah, that isn't going to be the case, providing we don't sort of add more soluble phosphorus. One of the things we'll look at very quickly is I'll come down to the base saturation levels. Why this is so important is that your calcium and your magnesium are both quite low, especially your calcium, which is not uncommon for soils, particularly heavier soils. And one of the reasons that you've got that quite so high is also because you've got a lot of carbon. And as you lift the amount of carbon in the soil, you actually lift the requirement for calcium. So if we actually slowly drop the carbon, if we stop putting compost in, we actually will reduce the requirement of the amount of lime that we need to actually to get that. And what the lime does is it creates, it opens the soil up. It's a really large molecule, the calcium molecule, so it pushes the clay apart, and you get better drainage and better gas exchange and aeration, and the worms will love you for it because the soil's easy to move through. So you start creating what we call flocculation starts to occur when we add a little bit of lime. Magnesium.
Can you explain, Daniel? Can
Yep.
you explain, please, flocculation?
Okay, flocculation, oh gosh, essentially is the process by where you are breaking up the clay particles. So it's pushing the clay apart and allowing water and air to move through the soil. So that movement of water and air through the soil, I think, is actually what technically terms that flocculation, but it's actually the breaking up of the clay. To flocculate the clay is what we're looking for. And in your soil, it's relatively simple in terms of the fact that we just basically need to apply some things like lime and dolomite to get those levels up. And that will improve the conditions for the biology, because you've got better gas exchange. So where they're breathing out CO2 to feed your plants and oxygen sucking in, that's the gas exchange part of it. So oxygen going into the soil, CO2 rising up out of the soil. That's a normal process for a healthy soil. That keeps that soil aerobic, so that sponsors the aerobic organisms by keeping that gas exchange happening. It allows water to percolate and move down through the soil much easier, and that's all the fantastic things basically calcium and lime do. And magnesium needs to be in balance. Between those two, you're looking at 80% of the total base saturation of soil is calcium magnesium. Shows you the level of importance, so that's why we look at that ratio first and foremost. And that will sort of, once you add those, that'll lower things like your hydrogen levels down to be closer to the ideal 10%. So it's all about balance. It's about putting in some of the right inputs to achieve an actual balance, where I guess we're looking for everything to be, what we call it the Goldilocks principle sort of thing, to get everything just right, and everybody's happy with that. What I do see just quickly is that your potassium is sneaking up. And the reason that is up, again, is related to the compost coming in. Compost is typically quite often based around some sort of wood pulp component, wood chips and mulch, and they tend to overdo that a little bit, and so that means that quite often composts come in with quite a lot of potassium. So as you end up with more and more compost coming in, and you're getting that you reach that excessive point, you actually end up pushing your potassium a bit high. 7% is the max that we want to see if it was a fruit crop. If we were growing fruiting crops, kiwi fruit, apples, tomatoes, potatoes, anything that's basically creating this massive fruit structure, that they fill that with potassium. So we look at 7% as being the upper limit. But if you're looking at mostly green leafy crops, then we're really only looking for about 5%. So as a general rule, we would say we wouldn't want to add any more potassium to your soil, because we'll end up in an excess. And when you have an excess of potassium, it interferes with the uptake of calcium and magnesium, which is already deficient in your soil. And also tends to, you end up creating a situation that tends to sponsor weed growth, and various other things that happen with that. So the very last thing I've got to say that relates to all of this is that we start looking at your nitrogen cycle. And up here, what we've got is two forms of nitrogen that we're looking at: nitrate nitrogen, which is responsible for vegetative growth, largely in plants, and ammonium nitrogen, which is responsible for the more mature growth aspects of your plant. And when we're looking at what we basically want to do is we want to see these in balance. And at the moment, they're significantly out of balance. We've sort of got an excess of nitrogen, and we're a little bit deficient really on the ammonium scale. And the thing that governs that in your soil is actually soil fungi. Fungi are actually really a key component when we start getting these things wrong. And that's also related to our low calcium levels, because when we have soil that gets saturated, the bacteria lack oxygen, so they then strip down the ammonium nitrogen and to use the hydrogen atoms, and you end up creating nitrate nitrogen. So in winter, when you start seeing excess nitrates, it usually means drainage isn't the greatest, and that links directly to correlate to what we're seeing in a low calcium amount. So it's about drawing, you can see all the links between all these various different things. Your soil's doing exactly what we'd expect it to do given the set of results that we're seeing. But it's really, on average, it's actually a pretty decent soil. It just needs a little bit of tweaking, and not what we've got to be very careful of here is now when we're using compost, we need to be backing off that for probably a year or so. And then looking at only maintaining it at tiny amounts. And I say 1 centimetre over the bed per year as a single application would be more than enough in most cases by any stretch of the imagination. And once your soil's really healthy, it won't even really require that.
So I think we'll probably go over by about 5 minutes, because I just think it would be what often is left is like, wow, if I don't use compost, what do I do? And I think now we've gone over this in plenty of our farmer in the field sessions, but I think, Michelle, I think would be great to leave you with feeling confident with a strategy for preparing beds, preparing your seeds and your seedlings, taking plants in and out of the garden beds. You're going to be using photosynthesis and the sap production from photosynthesis to repair your soil systems in the most part, with the support of some microbial and mineral inoculants. So Daniel, do you want to just potentially share the simple strategy that you would give Michelle that she can move forward with? And then Michelle, you can ask some questions, and potentially Levi can support any questions that you have.
I guess the first thing I would ask is that the soil analysis that the sample you've taken, was it across all your productive beds or a particular area in your farm? Like, is there differences?
No, so that's from, well, there's one little section I didn't sample because it is a bit different. So I've just taken from I think it's 19 beds across that I took that sample. Yeah.
So
that's all of our beds that are in production with the general kind of crop rotation.
So to moving forward, as a crop rotate, as a bed has finished cropping, to move that bed, what we would do is create a simple recipe based around probably some lime and dolomite, and just quickly maybe a little bit of manganese, for argument's sake, and a little bit of boron as a corrective, what we call a corrective or prescriptive blend. And that's just worked out to try and get those base saturations and all the basic parameters right in that soil. That can just be simply laid on top and basically raked in and then planted into straight away again. Because to get the solubility factor, like your conductivity levels up, and to get that soil soluble, the key thing here is to get as much photosynthesis happening in those beds as absolutely humanly possible. I don't think, like some people might talk in terms of cover crops, but a cover crop really at this point isn't you're not looking for huge amounts of nutrition, and we're not looking for huge amounts of organic matter or anything. In fact, we're looking for less. So putting in cash crops and densely planting those, sometimes overplanting, as I said, and either a thinning or harvesting as you go through that process is going to stimulate the soil. So I don't know exactly what your existing processes have been, but that's kind of the simple way I would look at it. And if I was wanting to expand your farm, for argument's sake, on your piece of land, what I would do is I do a soil analysis of the untouched block. And what you'll probably find is that it has lower organic matter, but it's still actually pretty good overall. Soils in Taranaki, and often we find untouched soils in these farms often actually measure up a little bit better than the soils that we've been messing around with for a while. Because if they're just let to grow in pasture and not added to, they tend to be quite good at correcting themselves. And so if you were to start a new bed, you would be following the sort of, as you said before, the principles that we're talking about, basically laying down a single heavy application of compost on top of a weed protection cover and planting straight into that. But the soil analysis gives you the confidence to sort of make some of those decisions. Because when we get all these various different factors right, what we find is we then get the soil functioning actually as a soil system, and along with the plant and the photosynthesis that goes on, they're more than capable of managing the nutritional requirements from the soil and the system that's there. The idea that we have to constantly come along and put fertilizer on or add fertilizer all the time, unfortunately, is kind of a misunderstood process of what actually soil is and should do. I always use the example at the moment there of, if you think of a native forest or a natural ecosystem that's incredibly productive, nobody's coming along fertilizing it, pruning or messing with it, and it's capable of sustaining incredible biodiversity as well as incredible photosynthetic capacity without any bags of fertilizer associated with it. So it's understanding how that system operates and trying to replicate that with our own growing systems.
So on top of that, so that the initial introduction of minerals is just a once-off, and then she's looking at, would you be recommending using the liquid fertilizer teas, like your step 2 and 3? Obviously, sorry, step 2 is for seed preparation, but step 3 and 4 at this stage?
The thing that they have the great ability of is that while your soil is not functioning as well as it should do, using foliar applications and putting beneficial organisms on all the time basically helps speed up help the plant repair that system much faster. So you're just supporting the natural plant system's immune system, increasing its photosynthetic capacity, ensuring that it's got a full mineral load along with all the beneficials, that it might, for argument's sake, when you've got lots of excess phosphorus, sometimes the plants can be quite deficient in things like zinc and copper and manganese, because there's interference with their availability that's going on. So the foliar applications, which I think you did get already from us, didn't you? Yeah. Which you've got that process being followed. That's just basically helping support. It's reducing the crop loss, increasing crop productivity, but more it's about supporting and I guess speeding up from a commercial sense the soil health process that we're trying to gain. And that's, we're talking about foliars, but essentially that's what it is, because that plant feeds. That improves the photosynthetic capacity, which then improves the amount of carbon that's available, soluble carbon that's available to go feed the biological system of the soil.
And Daniel talks about that more in depth in our 3rd masterclass. So please do go and have a look at that resource to learn a lot more about how that functions. Now, Michelle, we've got time for only a couple of questions. Really, we're over time, but I think unfair not to give you a chance to ask a couple of questions. Daniel, do you want to? That's great. Perfect.
I just wanted to say that it was a huge BFO blinding flash of the obvious for me that masterclass 3 with the phylosphere was brilliant. I was saying to myself, why are we foliar feeding? I don't understand this. And then it was brilliantly explained. So that was great to see. Thank you so much for that with the soil analysis. That makes so much sense to me. I'm completely happy to do all of that and make that work. I don't really have any questions about that. That just seems straightforward to me. I can make that happen and we can go forward from there. I guess my only thing now is it's June and I want to plant lots of things, but they're not going to grow very much, and I don't have enough seedlings, and I don't have, what could I do right now or next week to fill in some of these beds.
What do you reckon, Levi?
Cover crop.
Broad beans. I'd be getting broad beans in.
Broad beans,
So,
yeah. Edible
broad
cover
beans.
crop.
Directly seed those.
Yeah,
Yep.
direct seeding them, and I would be inoculating them before I put them in the ground, and you could actually plant peas alongside them. I'd be looking at that. They grow quite well in the cold temperature, and they're fabulous. And you could even start harvesting the leaves. They do really well with being pruned. Actually, they grow really well, and you can start to include those leaves when they're young in some of your green mixes, for example. I'd really love to hear from you, Michelle. We are an organisation doing this for free because we know that it's totally useful, and I think I would love to hear from you as our kind of parting, closure as to when you discovered this platform, and how have you found it useful, and why would you recommend it to others?
So I think for me, I knew that there was something missing, that I wanted to have less soil exposed, that I wanted to be doing better with my succession planting and things. So I've learned a lot over the last 3 years, part-time being a market gardener, but I knew there was something a bit missing, and I just, through other people that I knew, found out about the Urban Farmers Alliance, and then through that, the Regenerate Now. And yeah, then I've watched every single Instagram takeover and masterclass and Farmer in the Field, and just learned so much from every single one of them. It just seemed obvious to me that when can I be in the Farmer in the Field, because I knew that I could gain so much from it for our place. So yeah, it's just been absolutely fantastic.
Fabulous. Well, thank you, Michelle. Levi, is there anything you want to say? And otherwise, we'll wrap this up.
Nah, I really enjoyed today's session. Thanks, everyone. Yeah.
Yeah, it was really good. Thanks, Michelle, for your time as well, and for showing us your farm. Yep, it was really good.
Thank you so much. Thank you for everything. Yeah, it's been amazing. Thank you to all of you for sharing your knowledge today.